It was the dead of winter, 1846, in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The air was thick with snow, and the wind howled like a beast in pain. In a makeshift camp, huddled around a dying fire, a group of pioneers fought against the biting cold and the gnawing hunger that threatened to consume them from within. Among them was Eliza, a young woman with eyes that had seen too much. She clutched a tattered blanket around her shoulders, her breath visible in the frigid air. Beside her, her fiancé John stared into the flames, his face gaunt and hollow. Her brother William sat across from them, sharpening a knife with a distant look in his eyes. They had been trapped for weeks, their food supplies long gone. The dreams of a new life in California had turned into a nightmare of survival, but something else lurked in the shadows of the forest, something ancient and malevolent. Whispers on the wind, eyes watching from the darkness. Eliza could feel it, a presence that chilled her to the bone, more than the snow ever could. That night, as the fire crackled and the group tried to sleep, Eliza heard it, a low, guttural growl, followed by a scream that pierced the silence. She sat up, heart pounding, but the camp was still. Had it been a dream? Then she saw it. A figure moving between the trees, tall and thin, with eyes that glowed like embers. It was watching them, waiting. Eliza shook John awake. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. John rubbed his eyes and looked out into the night. "See what?" But the figure was gone, vanished into the snow. Eliza lay back down, trying to convince herself it was just her imagination, but sleep wouldn't come. The stories her brother had told her, tales of the Wendigo, a creature that haunted the forests, feeding on human flesh, echoed in her mind. She had always thought they were just stories to scare children, but now, in this desolate place with death all around, she wasn't so sure. As the night wore on, the temperature dropped further and the wind picked up, carrying with it a faint, eerie howl. Eliza pulled her blanket tighter, but it did little to ward off the cold, or the fear. Little did they know, the true horror was just beginning. For in those mountains, something far worse than hunger stalked them, a creature of legend, a spirit of the wild, the Wendigo, and it was hungry. 6 months earlier, in the spring of 1846, the air was filled with promise and excitement. The Donner Party, a group of pioneers from Illinois, set out on the Oregon Trail, their eyes set on the golden lands of California. Eliza stood beside the covered wagon, watching as her father, George Donner, the elected leader of the party, gave a rousing speech to the assembled families. "We are embarking on a great adventure," he said, his voice strong and confident. "Together we will cross this vast continent and build a new life in the West. Let us be brave, let us be united, and let us trust in God to guide us." The crowd cheered, and Eliza felt a surge of hope. She turned to John, who smiled at her, his hand finding hers. "This is it, Eliza," he said. "Our future starts now." William, her brother, was less enthusiastic. He had heard rumors of the dangers that lay ahead, hostile tribes, treacherous terrain, and the ever-present threat of disease. But he kept his concerns to himself, not wanting to dampen the spirits of the group. As the wagons rolled out, Eliza looked back at the familiar landscape of her home, knowing she might never see it again. But she was young, in love, and ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Little did she know, those challenges would be far greater than anyone could have imagined. The journey began smoothly enough. The party made good time, following the well-trodden path of the Oregon Trail. They crossed rivers, navigated prairies, and marveled at the beauty of the American wilderness. But as they approached Fort Bridger, a decision loomed that would change everything. Lansford Hastings, a promoter of a new route called the Hastings Cutoff, promised a shorter, easier path to California. He claimed it would save them weeks of travel. George Donner and James Reed, the co-leaders, were intrigued, despite warnings from experienced travelers that the cutoff was untested and potentially dangerous. They decided to take the risk. Eliza overheard her father and Reed discussing it. "It's a chance to get ahead," Reed said. "We can be in California before the snows come." George nodded. "I trust Hastings. He's been through there before." But William was skeptical. "I've heard it's a tough route, with deserts and mountains. Maybe we should stick to the known path." John dismissed his concerns. "Don't be a coward, William. We need to be bold if we're to succeed." Eliza felt a pang of worry but pushed it aside. She trusted her father and John. So the Donner Party turned south onto the Hastings Cutoff, unaware of the fate that awaited them. The Hastings Cutoff proved to be anything but a shortcut. The trail was rough and untested, leading the Donner Party through dense forests, across raging rivers, and over steep, rocky mountains. Wagons broke down, their wooden wheels splintering under the strain. Oxen, weakened by the harsh terrain, collapsed and died, leaving families to abandon precious supplies. Progress was agonizingly slow, and what was supposed to save time ended up costing them weeks. Eliza watched as the optimism that had fueled the group began to wane. Tempers flared over broken axles and lost livestock. Arguments erupted over the smallest decisions: who would lead the next day's march, how to ration the dwindling food. One evening, as they camped by a dry riverbed, James Reed and John Snyder, a young teamster, got into a heated dispute over the best way to cross a steep incline. Voices rose, and before anyone could intervene, Reed's knife flashed, and Snyder fell, blood staining the dust. The group was stunned. Reed was banished, forced to leave his family behind and ride ahead alone. Eliza clung to John, her heart heavy with the weight of the violence. "This isn't what we dreamed of," she whispered. John's jaw tightened. "We'll make it, Eliza. We have to." William, ever watchful, pulled her aside later. "This place is testing us, Eliza. I've heard stories from the guides, tales of spirits in these wilds. They say hunger can awaken things best left sleeping." Eliza shivered, dismissing his words as superstition, but the seed of doubt was planted. As the party pushed deeper into the cutoff, the landscape grew more unforgiving. The Great Salt Lake Desert stretched before them, a barren wasteland that sapped their strength and hope. Water was scarce, and the sun beat down mercilessly. By the time they reached the Sierra Nevada, it was late October, and the first snowflakes were falling. George Enner, his face lined with worry, urged the group to hurry. "We need to cross the pass before the storms hit," he said. But the mountains loomed like silent sentinels, and the air grew colder. Eliza noticed the group's Native American guides, Luis and Salvador, exchanging uneasy glances. One night, Luis spoke quietly to William, his voice low. "These mountains are not safe. The old ones speak of a spirit here, a hungry one. It feeds on greed and despair." William relayed the warning to Eliza, but she brushed it off, clinging to John's assurances that they would reach California soon. Yet, as the snow began to pile up, trapping their wagons near Truckee Lake, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, waiting for their weakest moment. Snow fell relentlessly, blanketing the Sierra Nevada and trapping the Donner Party in a frozen prison. The wagons, battered and broken, were abandoned as the group scrambled to build crude shelters near Truckee Lake. Some, including George Donner and his family, camped at Alder Creek, 6 miles away, their axle broken beyond repair. Eliza, John, and William stayed at the lake, huddling in a makeshift cabin with the Breen and Murphy families. Food was scarce, only a few sacks of flour and dried meat remained. The group rationed carefully, but hunger gnawed at their insides. Eliza's hands trembled as she divided meager portions, her stomach aching with every bite she gave away. John grew restless, pacing the cabin, his eyes darting to the darkening forest. "We'll hunt," he declared, grabbing a rifle. "There's game out there." But the snow was too deep, and the animals had fled. William, more cautious, spent his days reinforcing the shelters, his face etched with worry. "We can't stay here forever," he told Eliza. "The snow's only getting worse." One night, around a flickering fire, Luis, one of the native guides, spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You feel it, don't you? The cold isn't just in the air, it's in your bones, your heart. The Wendigo is near." Eliza's blood ran cold. She remembered William's stories of the creature, a gaunt, towering figure with glowing eyes, born of hunger and greed. Luis continued, "It comes when men turn on each other, when they break the sacred laws." John scoffed, but Eliza saw fear flicker in his eyes. Days turned to weeks, and the first deaths came. Lavina Murphy's youngest child, weakened by starvation, slipped away in the night. The group buried the body in the snow, their prayers drowned out by the howling wind. Eliza clung to John, seeking comfort, but his embrace felt distant. "We'll get through this," he murmured. "Boo." His voice lacked conviction. Strange noises began to haunt the camp, cracks in the trees, whispers that seemed to call their names. Eliza woke one night to find John staring out the cabin's small window, his breath fogging the glass. "There's something out there," he said, his voice low and unsteady. She followed his gaze but saw only darkness, yet the air felt heavy, charged with an unnatural presence. William, overhearing, whispered to Eliza, "Luis was right. Something's watching us." As the hunger grew, so did the tension. The group's unity began to fracture, and Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that the Wendigo was already among them, waiting to claim its first victim. The snow piled higher, sealing the Donner Party in their icy tomb. By December, the food was gone, and the group survived on boiled leather and tree bark. Eliza's body ached with hunger, her ribs visible beneath her tattered dress. John grew gaunt, his once strong frame reduced to a shadow. William, ever vigilant, kept watch over the camp, his eyes scanning the trees for threats, human or otherwise. The deaths mounted. Another child succumbed, then an elderly man, their bodies buried in shallow graves beneath the snow. Whispers of desperation began to circulate. Patrick Breen, a gruff farmer, muttered about doing what must be done to survive. Eliza overheard, her heart sinking. She knew what he meant, but the thought was too horrific to entertain. One night, Luis gathered a small group by the fire, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. "The Wendigo is not just a story," he said, his voice trembling. "It's a spirit that feeds on weakness, on greed. It takes those who break the taboo." John rolled his eyes, but Eliza saw his hands shake. "We're not savages," he snapped. "We'll find a way." But the hunger was relentless, and the group's resolve began to crumble. William pulled Eliza aside, his voice urgent. "I've seen John acting strange. He's been sneaking out at night, staring into the woods. I don't trust him." Eliza's heart ached. She loved John, but she couldn't ignore the change in him. His eyes, once warm, now held a cold, distant glint. That night, a scream shattered the silence. Eliza bolted upright, her heart racing. It was Margaret Reed sobbing over her husband's empty bedroll. "He's gone," she cried. The group searched the camp, but James Reed was nowhere to be found. Tracks led into the forest, then vanished in the snow. Panic set in. Some whispered of wolves, others of something worse. Eliza clung to John, but his grip was too tight, his breath rag. "Gidia, we need to stick together," he said, but his voice sounded hollow, almost predatory. William's warnings echoed in Eliza's mind as she watched John closely. The next morning, a gruesome discovery was made. A piece of torn cloth stained with blood found near the camp's edge. It belonged to Reed. The group fell silent, fear and suspicion poisoning the air. Eliza's eyes met William's, and she knew. The Wendigo was no longer just a story. It was here, and it was hungry for more. The days blurred into a haze of cold and hunger, each one bleaker than the last. The snow buried the Donner party's camp, sealing them in a frozen grave. Another death struck. Jacob Donner, George's brother, withered away from starvation. His body was laid in the snow, a shallow grave marked by a crude cross. Eliza stood by, her breath visible in the frigid air, her heart heavy with the weight of loss. The group's faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow with despair. Luis, the native guide, approached her, his voice low. "Eliza, the Wendigo is here," he said, his eyes scanning the trees. "It's a spirit born of hunger, of greed. It takes those who break the sacred laws." Eliza's stomach twisted. "We haven't done anything." Mourning brought no relief, only another loss. Frances Donner, George's youngest daughter, slipped away in the night, her tiny body too weak to endure. The group buried her beside Jacob, the snow swallowing their grief. Eliza's tears froze on her cheeks as she watched George, his spirit broken. William pulled her aside, his face pale. "I found tracks around the camp," he said. "Huge, unnatural, leading into the forest, but stopping abruptly." Eliza's heart raced. "The Wendigo?" she whispered. William nodded. "It's watching us." That night, John grew more distant, muttering in his sleep, his body twitching. Eliza reached for him, but he jerked away. "Don't touch me," he hissed, his eyes cold. "John, please," she pleaded, but he turned away, leaving her alone with her fears. The camp's tension boiled over. Patrick Breen accused Louis Keseberg of stealing food, their shouts echoing in the cramped cabin. Fists were raised before others intervened. Eliza watched, her hope fading. The group was tearing itself apart, and the Wendigo's presence grew stronger. She lay awake, listening to the wind, hearing whispers that called her name. The tracks William found haunted her, proof that something unnatural stalked them. As the group drifted into uneasy sleep, Eliza knew they couldn't last much longer. The hunger was relentless, and the Wendigo was waiting. The unthinkable came at dawn. The group's last ox, their final hope for food, lay dead in its pen, its neck twisted unnaturally, eyes wide with terror. No tracks marked the snow, only the eerie stillness of death. Eliza screamed, drawing the others. "What did this?" George Donner demanded, his voice frail. William examined the corpse, shaking his head. "No man could do this." John stepped forward, his face calm, almost serene. "I did it," he said, his voice chilling. The group gasped. Eliza's heart stopped. "John, why?" she cried. "It was necessary," he replied, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Patrick Breen drew his knife. "He's a monster. Banish him." Eliza stepped between them. "No, he's not himself. It's the Wendigo." William grabbed her arm. "Eliza, he's dangerous." Louise spoke up, his voice steady. "She's right. The Wendigo has him. There's a ritual to drive it out, but it's risky." The group debated, fear and desperation clashing. Finally, they agreed to try the ritual, hoping to save John and themselves. As they prepared, Eliza watched John, his gaze fixed on the forest. She wondered if the man she loved was still inside, or if the Wendigo had claimed him completely. That night, the cabin was a crucible of fear. Luis led the ritual, chanting in his native tongue, candles flickering around John, who sat bound in the center. His eyes were wild, his body tense. Eliza watched, praying for a miracle. As Luis's chants grew louder, John convulsed, a guttural roar shaking the walls. The candles went out, plunging them into darkness. Screams erupted, and William shouted, "He's loose!" When the lanterns were relit, John stood over William, a knife in his hand, blood dripping from a gash on William's arm. "John, no!" Eliza cried, his face twisted, not human. "You can't save me," he growled. The group tackled him, tying him to a post. Eliza rushed to William, binding his wound, tears streaming. "He's gone," George said softly. "The Wendigo has him." The next morning, they made a desperate choice. They couldn't stay with John, a threat. The Forlorn Hope, 15 members including William, set out on snowshoes to find help at Sutter's Fort. Eliza wanted to go, but William insisted she stay to watch John. As the group vanished into the snow, Eliza felt dread settle in her bones. The Wendigo was still out there, and time was running out. The camp grew quieter without the Forlorn Hope, but the silence was oppressive. Food was gone, replaced by boiled hides and bones. Eliza's hunger was a constant ache, but she forced herself to care for John, still tied in the cabin. His eyes glowed, his voice a snarl. "Leave me," he growled, but she couldn't abandon him. One night she heard a growl outside, followed by tearing flesh. Peering out, she saw a deer, gutted with no tracks around it. The next morning the group found the carcass, fear gripping them. "The Wendigo's toying with us," Luis said. Food stores vanished, and more animal remains appeared, half-eaten with no explanation. Then tragedy struck. Tamsin Donner, who stayed to care for George, was found dead, her body emaciated, eyes frozen in terror. They buried her beside Francis, the snow hiding their grief. Eliza's hope dwindled. The Wendigo's presence was everywhere, in the whispers, the shadows, and John's glowing eyes. She knew they were running out of time. Hunger became a monster of its own, driving the group to madness. One night, desperation broke them. Patrick Breen, his face gaunt, suggested the unthinkable, eating the dead. Eliza recoiled, but others nodded, their eyes empty. They exhumed Jacob's body, the frozen flesh carved in silence. Eliza refused, her stomach churning, but she saw John, still bound, gnawing on a bone, his eyes glowing with hunger. "John, no!" she screamed, but he only grinned, his teeth stained red. Louis Kesselberg, unperturbed, joined in, his face blank. The group was horrified, yet some followed, survival trumping morality. Eliza turned away, tears falling. "This is what it wants," Luis whispered. "The Wendigo feeds on this." The group decided to wait for the Forlorn Hope, clinging to hope of rescue. But Eliza knew the truth. The Wendigo had won its first battle, and it was far from done. The camp descended into a grim routine, the survivors haunted by their actions. Eliza avoided the others, her heart torn between love for John and the horror of what he'd become. His laughter echoed in the cabin, a chilling sound that wasn't his. One night, she woke to whispers, not from the wind but inside her head, urging her to join the feast. She clutched her blanket, praying for strength. Outside, the snow glowed faintly, as if lit by unseen eyes. The next day, another death. Lavina Murphy, weakened by grief and hunger, collapsed. Her body was added to the grim larder, and Eliza's resolve wavered. William's absence gnawed at her. She wondered if the Forlorn Hope had survived. Luis, now a shadow of himself, warned her, "The Wendigo is growing stronger. It wants us all." Eliza looked at John, his ropes fraying, and feared what he might do if freed. The air grew heavier, the Wendigo's presence undeniable. Eliza saw it in her dreams, a gaunt figure with antlers, its eyes burning into her soul. She woke screaming, the others staring. If you're still with me, I say to you now, type "I hear the whispers" in the comments below. Do it twice to show you're ready for what's next. The group's morale crumbled as more food vanished, replaced by eerie offerings of half-eaten animals. John's rope snapped one night, and he lunged at Eliza, his hands cold as death. She fought him off, tears streaming, as others restrained him again. Luis said, "It's too late for him. The Wendigo owns him." Eliza refused to believe it, but doubt crept in. The camp was a powder keg, with fights breaking out over scraps. Eliza clung to hope for the Forlorn Hope, but the whispers grew louder, promising salvation through surrender. The Forlorn Hope's fate was unknown, but back at camp the horror escalated. Another death, Charles Berger, a teamster, left the group with another body to consume. Eliza gagged, refusing to partake, but the others grew accustomed to the act, their humanity slipping away. John, now barely recognizable, spoke in riddles, his voice a mix of his own and the Wendigo's. "Join us," he whispered to Eliza, his eyes glowing. She fled the cabin, stumbling into the snow, where she saw tracks, huge, clawed, circling the camp. Luis found her, his face grim. "The Wendigo is testing us," he said. "It wants us to break completely." That night, a scream woke the camp. Margaret Reed found her daughter Virginia missing, only to discover her wandering the forest, unharmed but dazed, muttering about a tall man who led her there. Eliza's fear deepened. The Wendigo was no longer content to watch. The group's unity shattered. Accusations flew. Keseberg was blamed for Virginia's disappearance, though she returned unharmed. Fights erupted, and but blood stained the snow. Eliza stayed by John, hoping to find a trace of the man she loved, but his eyes were empty, his words venomous. "You'll join me soon," he taunted. Luis proposed another ritual, but the group refused, too broken to try. One night, Eliza saw the Wendigo itself, tall, skeletal, its antlers scraping the sky. It stood at the camp's edge, watching. She screamed, waking the others, but it was gone. The next day, the Forlorn Hope's absence weighed heavier. Eliza overheard Breen and Keseberg whispering about killing Luis and Salvador, the native guides, for food. She warned Luis, who nodded grimly. "It's what the Wendigo wants," he said, "to turn us into monsters." Eliza knew they were running out of time to escape the creature's grasp. Far from the camp, the Forlorn Hope struggled through the mountains. William led the group, his arms still bandaged from John's attack. Snow blinded them, and hunger drove them to madness. One night they saw it. A gaunt figure with glowing eyes, watching from a ridge. William shouted, but it vanished. Two members, Antonio and Franklin Graves, collapsed, their bodies left in the snow. The survivors, driven by desperation, began to eat them. William resisted, but the Wendigo's whispers filled his mind, urging him to give in. Back at camp, Eliza faced her own horrors. John broke free again, attacking Keseberg before being restrained. His strength was unnatural, his laughter chilling. Eliza saw the Wendigo in her dreams again, its voice promising power if she surrendered. She woke to find a knife in her hand, unsure how it got there. The line between reality and nightmare was blurring. The Forlorn Hope dwindled, with only 7 of the 15 remaining. William pushed on, haunted by the Wendigo's presence. They found a frozen stream, but as they drank, the water turned red, like blood. William saw the creature again, its antlers silhouetted against the moon. Back at camp, another death, Patrick Dolan, pushed the survivors closer to collapse. Eliza watched as the group consumed his body, their eyes empty. She clung to her morality, but hunger clawed at her. John, now barely human, whispered to her, "It's easier if you give in." She fled to Luis, who was weakening. "We can't fight it much longer," he said. "The Wendigo is winning." That night, Eliza heard screams. Luis and Salvador were gone, their tracks leading into the forest. She knew the group had turned on them, driven by the Wendigo's hunger. Eliza's hope for rescue faded as the snow kept falling. The camp was a graveyard of hope. Eliza found Luis and Salvador's bodies in the forest, their flesh carved away. She vomited, realizing the group had crossed a final line. Keseberg admitted to the act, his face devoid of shame. "It's survival," he said. Eliza confronted him, but the others backed him, their humanity gone. John, still bound, laughed, his voice echoing the Wendigo's. "You're next," he said. Eliza's dreams were now visions of the creature, its claws reaching for her. She woke to find scratches on her arms, though no one had touched her. The snow glowed red at night, and whispers filled the air, urging surrender. William's absence was a constant ache. She prayed he'd reached help, but the Wendigo's presence was stronger, its eyes watching from every shadow. Eliza knew they were no longer just fighting hunger. They were fighting for their souls. The Forlorn Hope reached a breaking point. William and the survivors, now only 5, were starving. They ate their shoes, then turned to the body of their fallen. William wept, but the Wendigo's whispers drowned his guilt. He saw the creature daily now, its form clearer, its voice promising strength. Back at camp, Eliza faced a new horror. George Donner died, his gangrene too severe. The group consumed him, and Eliza, unable to watch, hid in the cabin. John broke free again, his strength terrifying. He cornered Eliza, his eyes glowing. "Join me," he said, his breath cold. She fought him off, but his touch left her shaking. The next day she found a note in her pocket, written in her own hand, but not her memory. "Give in." The Wendigo was inside her mind, and she feared she was losing herself. The camp was a slaughterhouse, and rescue seemed a distant dream. The forlorn hope stumbled into a Native American village, half dead. William begged for help, but the villagers, sensing the Wendigo's taint, hesitated. They gave food but warned of a curse following them. William saw the creature in the distance, its eyes never leaving him. Back at camp, Eliza was alone with her fears. The group was down to a handful, their eyes vacant, their hands stained with blood. John's ropes frayed completely, and he vanished into the snow. Eliza searched for him, finding only tracks that weren't human. That night, the Wendigo appeared to her, its form towering, its voice a chorus of screams. "You're mine," it said. She woke screaming, her hands clutching a bone she didn't remember taking. The line between her and the Wendigo blurred, and she feared John was gone forever. Rescue finally came in February 1847, led by James Reed, who had survived his banishment. He found the camp a scene of horror, bodies scattered, survivors barely human. Eliza, frail and haunted, clung to life. Reed's men restrained Keseberg, who rambled about the Wendigo. John was nowhere to be found, his tracks leading into the forest. William returned with the rescuers, his eyes hollow from what he'd done. He embraced Eliza, but she felt distant, her mind scarred by the Wendigo's whispers. The survivors were let out, but the mountains seemed alive, watching them. Eliza saw the creature one last time, its eyes promising to follow. Only 48 of the 87 survived, their stories suppressed by shame and fear. The Wendigo's curse lingered, a truth too dark to share. The survivors reached Sutter's Fort, but safety brought no peace. Eliza was a ghost of herself, haunted by John's disappearance and the Wendigo's voice in her dreams. William, too, was changed, his guilt over the forlorn hope's actions a heavy burden. The rescuers whispered of the camp's horrors, but the survivors stayed silent, fearing judgment. Eliza heard rumors of John, sightings of a gaunt figure in the mountains, eyes glowing. She wondered if he was still human, or if the Wendigo had claimed him fully. The group's diaries, including Patrick Breen's, hinted at unnatural forces, but these were buried, deemed too dangerous to share. Eliza tried to rebuild her life, but the whispers followed, a constant reminder of the price they paid. Years later, Eliza lived in California, a shadow of her former self. She never married, her heart tied to John, though she feared what he'd become. Stories of the Donner Party spread, but the Wendigo was omitted, a truth too terrifying for the public. William became a recluse, haunted by his actions. Eliza visited him, finding him carving strange symbols into wood, muttering about the creature. One night she dreamed of John, his face half human, half Wendigo, begging for release. She woke to find those same symbols scratched into her door. The Wendigo's influence lingered, a curse that never left. Eliza began to write her story, hoping to warn others, but she burned the pages, fearing they'd summon the creature again. The Donner Party's tale became a cautionary legend, but the Wendigo's role was erased, hidden by those who survived. Eliza's writings, though destroyed, left fragments in her mind, visions of the creature, its hunger eternal. She heard of other tragedies in the mountains, disappearances linked to glowing eyes and unnatural tracks. The Wendigo, she realized, was not bound to their camp. It was a force of nature, feeding on greed and despair wherever it found them. Eliza grew old, her life a testament to survival, but the cost was her peace. She warned others to respect the wild, to heed the old stories. The Wendigo was real, and it was always watching, waiting for the next soul to claim. You followed this tale to its end, a journey into the heart of darkness. The Donner Party's tragedy was more than starvation. It was a battle against a force older than time. The Wendigo, born of hunger and greed, turned men into monsters, and its shadow lingers still. Subscribe now. Pretty Little Deaths, to uncover more hidden truths, stories the world tried to bury. Eliza's warning echoes through the years. Beware the wild, for it watches you. The Wendigo is out there, in the mountains, in the shadows, waiting for those who stray too far. This is no mere story. It's a truth you were never meant to know. Type, "I hear the whispers" one last time in the comments, and carry this knowledge with you. It might just save your soul.